Hey guys, welcome to the Troy Gramling podcast. As always, I love hanging out together and learning about life, love, and leadership. You know, really what we're trying to do on this podcast is deal with the things we all have to deal with in order to succeed. You know, life, whether you're a stay-at-home mom, a business dude, a coach, a teacher, a CEO, whatever it is that you and I are called to do. We were called to do it and make an impact of significance. So we want to talk about and talk to the people that help us succeed in life. Now we're in a series on communicating because that's something we all do. Some of us do it effectively and some of us just use words. We just talk even if nobody's listening. So how do we communicate in such a way to make a difference? Now, before we get started, I want to encourage you to subscribe. We're on all the major platforms as well on YouTube if you'd like to see it in video format. Today, we're going to listen to a speech from 1993. Now, we've listened to presidents. We listened to a pastor and civil rights leader, MLK. Today, we're going to listen to Jimmy Valvano, one of my favorite coaches. I got to tell you, that is from my time period. I am a child of the 80s. And in the 80s, I think it was 1985, he won the national championship. He was the coach at North Carolina State University, and they made a last-second shot. And there's this famous video of Jimmy Valvano running all over the court looking for somebody to hug, but he can't find anybody. And he was a very loud, motivational, and exciting coach. And then he got cancer, and he never gave up. And in 1993, he gave a speech at ESPN's ESPYs that is still played today. It was the launch of the Jimmy V Foundation for Cancer. And so I want us to take some time today and listen to it. And again, as we have talked about all of our communicators, and the same is true for you and me, whether we're talking to our kids or our spouse or our girlfriend or our business or congregation, it's important to know what's happened beforehand, who you're talking to, and what's going on around you. And of course, in this case, Jimmy Valvano is receiving an award, and he is on television, and he's speaking to a group of his peers. So he's going to leverage that for authority in order to communicate to the people who are listening. He's not just up there to tell a joke. He's not just up there to even inspire people. He wants them to do something. That's the reason, even though he didn't feel well, he came and he gave this speech. He wants them to do something. So as we go along and as you listen, see if you can tell what he wants them to do. Or there's going to be a moment when he's very clear. But along the way, see if you can hear the journey we're going on. So listen to him build authority, all right? And here we go.
Time is very precious to me. I don't know how much I have left, and I have some things that I would like to say. Hopefully, at the end, I'll have something that will be important to other people too. But I can't help it. Now when I'm fighting cancer, everybody knows that. And people ask me all the time about how you go through your life and how's your day. And nothing has changed for me. As Dick said, I'm a very emotional, passionate man. I can't help it. That's being the son of Rocco and Angelina Valvano. That just comes with the territory, right? We hug, we kiss, we love. And when people say to me, how do you get through life or each day, it's the same thing. To me, there are three things we all should do every day. If we do this every day of our life, you're going to have, what a wonderful, number one is laugh. You should laugh every day. Number two is think. You should spend some time in thought. And number three is you should have your emotions moved to tears. Could be happiness or joy. But think about it. If you laugh, you think, and you cry, that's a full day. That's a heck of a day. You do that 7 days a week, you're going to have something special.
So you can see right off the bat that they're listening to him. He talks about having cancer, which, again, everybody can identify with because they've either experienced it themselves or somebody they love, and they know what it means, right? Cancer takes the lives of many, many, many people. And then he says, time has become important to me. And he says, I've got something to say. Right. So he immediately has us. He's not manipulating us. Everything he says is true. And you can tell by the way, the vulnerability in which he communicates it, that it's what he feels. But what he's saying that is real, he is leveraging because he's going to want us to do something. And he wants us to understand. And just the little bit that you heard, you quickly find out. He's not going to tell us something's not important, right? Because I know time's important to me. And then he even talks about laughing and crying, right? He talks about the three things that are important. But he has our attention, and he has our attention because he's leveraging the unfortunate and sad, right? Anytime somebody gets an illness that can take our life, it's a sad situation. But rather than feel bad for me, he goes the opposite way, which again, what immediately inspires, doesn't it? In other words, he's not going to leverage, feel bad for me, therefore do something. He's not going to say, I'm the victim. And because I'm a victim and life is unfair, this is what you need to do. No. He's going to go a whole different direction, which is much more inspirational. Okay? And gets a lot greater response, which is, again, is what he's after. So he builds authority with his words. We need to do the same thing. What situation are we in? What experiences have we had that give us authority to speak about what we're going to ask people to do? So if you're a parent, you're a business person, you're a pastor, it's important to, think through those things. What experiences have you had to give you the authority so as for people to listen to what you're trying to communicate? Now he's going to engage the audience. And I mean, he's great at this. Coaches are often good at this because they have to engage their players.
And I was so fired up about my first job. I see Lou Holtz, Coach Holtz here. What was it like the first job you had, right? The very first time you stood in the locker room to give a pep talk.
So notice right off the bat, what's he do? He calls out Lou Holtz. There are other people that I cut out of the clip where he calls out their name. Right? So that immediately engages. Now, you risk, if nobody knows who these people are, then you could disengage the audience. Right? Well, who's that? No. But because everybody knows the names he's calling out, Lou Holtz, is this historic football coach and communicator in his own right. Maybe we'll listen to one of his in the future. But he calls him out. So you engage the audience in two ways. One, that's a relationship. He knows somebody that also has authority. But also, I think there's that sense of, is he going to call me out? Right? So he's and call out in a positive way. He's engaging with the audience. Hey, you know what I'm talking about, right? You've been on that journey with me, right? And he's using people that they know, and they know their stories. So now it's not just his story. It's the story of other people as well.
That's a special place, the locker room, for a coach to give a talk.
All right. So he goes on in that and tells this very well, let me give you the rest of it. I think I have the rest of it here. Yeah, he goes on and tells this story. Wow, I got my Harley, our little dog, just is having a difficulty. You don't like what I'm saying, Harley? You don't like it? I'm not communicating in dog talk. But anyways, he goes on and he tells a story about how at his first coaching job, he read this book by a legendary football coach. And he goes in and he misquotes and messes it all up. And everybody laughs. And it's a very, very funny story. Again, the story has nothing to do with what he's going to ask them to do. Okay? But he's connecting with them. Laughter disarms people. Like as a pastor, if you're going to talk about money, which tightens people up, you're going to talk about sex, which tightens people up, you want to have funny, because funny loosens people up. Okay? So you want to make sure that along the way you tell some funny stories, because people relax, right? Because there's a tension. He knows there's a tension in the audience. Why? Because he has cancer. It's terminal. It's not likely he's going to live. He knows that. They all know that. So there's a tendency in that kind of environment to be tense, to not hear what's being said, and instead to feel pity for him. And so he tells this funny story that has nothing to do with cancer, has nothing to do with what he wants them to do, just makes them laugh. And again, that's so important to be able to read the environment and then engage the audience, because you're taking them on a journey. And again, this narrative, this journey you're taking them on is not just narrative. It's not just, hey, we went and we bought a dog, and then we went to Walmart and bought some food, and then we went home and we fed the dog, right? It's not just a narrative with your words. It's also an emotional journey. He's taking them on an emotional journey. He talks about a bunch of different things. Like I said, he's calling out different people by name. He's going to talk about the clock and how, they've been giving him so many minutes, but it doesn't matter to him. What are they going to do? Right? All these random, but while the narrative journey is random, the emotional journey connects. And again, as communicators, you want to do both to get the greatest power, right? But you have to pay attention to know what is most needed. He knows there's this one thing that he wants them to do. It's simple, it's not complicated, and they can do it or not do it. Okay? And he just wants to get them to a place so that they'll respond. So let's listen to this next part.
But if I told you it's 10 times the amount that goes in for cancer research, I also tell you that 500,000 people will die this year of cancer. And I also tell you that 1 in every 4 will be afflicted with this disease. And yet, for somehow, we seem to have put it in a little bit of the background. I want to bring it back on the front table. We need your help. I need your help. We need money for research. It may not save my life. It may save my children's lives. It may save someone you love.
So there it is, right? That's what he wants. And he's straight up about it. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't back away. I want your money, and here's why I want it. He talks about how AIDS is important, but it gets 10 times the money that cancer does, and that somehow it's gotten on the back burner. And he's not asking for the money to save his life. He's asking for the money to save the lives of people into the future, maybe their lives, maybe their kids' lives, maybe their grandkids' lives. And everything he's done up to this point has been for that moment. And if you listen to the speech, he goes on to talk about how ESPN is partnering with him to start the Jimmy V Foundation. That's not only do I want your money, here's where you need to give it. And we'll make sure that it goes to cancer research. I love the clarity. So many times people communicate and then you're done. You're like, what'd they want me to do? I heard a communicator one time say, it's really quite simple when you're communicating. What do you want me to know, and what do you want me to do? Everything I want you to know is in order to accomplish what I want you to do. Okay? And so that's the content part in the sense of narrative. But don't forget the emotional part, because every movie has an up and down when it comes to movies, and every sermon does, right? It has points where they're passionate, the intense, and then parts where that's released. And if you don't release it, you probably heard preachers who try to go like this, right? They just go up and up, or even communicators, up, and they just wear you out. Maybe as a parent, you had a parent like that. They bring you in, just on and on and on, and right? And they just wear you out because you can't emotionally stay there over and over. So that's what he wants. And then he ends with an incredible, again, inspiration.
I've got to go, and I've got one last thing. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. Cancer can take away all my physical abilities. It cannot touch my mind. It cannot touch my heart, and it cannot touch my soul. And those 3 things are going to carry on forever. I thank you, and God bless you all.
Right. And again, you couldn't see it, but if you watch it on YouTube, or they have to help him up onto the stage, they have to help him up off the stage. Now, you never know listening to it, because he speaks with clarity, and he speaks with strength, and he speaks with passion. And he ends it there, with what cancer can't do. And again, I'm inspired when I listen to that. And the reason I'm inspired is because I rather than feel pity for him, even though I know what happened, I know that he didn't live much longer. He says in the speech that he's going to fight with every ounce that he's got, and his hope is to be able to come back the next year and give that. I think the award that he wanted to be able to give it away the next year. Even though I know how his story ends, I'm still inspired by the fact to the very end he wasn't the victim. And what I mean by that is that he didn't surrender. When I say victim, that's what I mean. I'm not talking about how bad things happen to people. They do. But he doesn't surrender to it. And so when you hear him talk, you cheer him on, but you also think, you know what, there are certain things going on in your life, and they're challenging, and they're unfair, and maybe they're not going to change. Maybe there's no way through it or out, but that doesn't mean you have to give up. Because no matter what that situation is, like he said, right, there are certain things that it can't take away. And those are the things you're going to focus on. And those are the things that are going to not only motivate and inspire you, but others as well. So he does a great job of communicating in a short period of time inspiration. And I just want to say it one more time. I've said it several times in this episode, is don't forget about the emotional journey. All of our other communicators have went on emotional journeys, but we talked mostly about their narrative here, because he doesn't have a narrative. He doesn't talk about, his journey in cancer and when he got the news and all that. He doesn't talk about that. He's all over the place in the story of his life. But that's because he wants to get to that one spot. Because before he ever walked up there, he knew what he wanted to communicate. And if there's anything maybe to end with, is just, what is it you want to say? Your next communicating opportunity, whether it be to a friend, a spouse, kids, business, church, what do you want to say? All right. Let's wrap up today's episode as we think about the reality that we're always communicating, but especially when we want to move people from point A to point B. So let's think about whatever that is in your life, okay? And let me remind you of the three things that kind of jump out at me from Jimmy V's speech. The first one is engage the audience. And think about different ways in which you do that. You can do that with stories. You can do that with what you wear. Depending, again, on who you are. Some people could care less. They have to get over. Because here's the thing. Everything that's not a benefit, you don't want to be something you have to get over to engage the audience. Right? Like I have tattoos. So there are certain audiences that if I don't wear a long sleeve shirt, I'm going to have to get past my tattoos for them to hear what I'm saying. There are other audiences where my tattoos might be a benefit. Right? So you want to think through, what can you engage the audience with and what might be offense to the audience? Because if you don't engage the audience, you're not going to get anywhere. The second thing is to make sure that you communicate clearly. What do you want them to do? This is the worst mistake we make in every context, with kids, with spouse, with friends, at work, at church. What we think we do a great job. I told them, and then they don't do it. And we're like, oh my gosh, what happened? Because we're really bad. So many times in ministry, people will go out to make announcements, but they'll never tell people what they want them to do. And when they don't, guess what? They don't do it. They don't sign up for that event. They don't go over there. They don't do what we want them to do. And it's not because sometimes they don't want to. It's because nobody ever told them. It's the hardest part, as a pastor. One of the things you have to do is challenge people in the area of finance. And the most difficult part of that is being direct. Here's what the scripture says, and here's what you need to do. Okay? But if you don't, then you're never going to communicate effectively. So you got to be clear in what you want them to do. That's the thing I tell everybody who makes announcements at Potential Church. What do we want them to do? And it's the biggest mistake we make. New people will go out and make announcements, and they'll be entertaining, and that's good. It's good that people have a good time, but nobody does anything. Nobody buys the ticket. Nobody signs up. Nobody gets involved in ministry. Nobody moves from seat A to seat B or whatever it is that we're asking them to do, because we don't communicate. So let me just say it again. Let me be really clear. Whether you're watching or listening or wherever you are, and no matter who you're talking to, know this going in. You are not communicating as clearly as you think you are. It's the problem between most supervisors and the person that reports to them. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to somebody and talking to them, well, did you let the person you're leading know? Oh, yeah, I talked to them. I told them exactly. And then you talk to the other person. I said, man, I wish I'd have known. You're like, what? So I'm just telling you. I don't care who you are. It's not as clear as you think it is. So we all have to work on that. Be clear. And then lastly, it's just inspire them to action. And that can be, again, with a story. It can be personal. One of the things, and again, if it motivates you, it'll motivate them. If it inspires you, it'll probably inspire them. And one of the stories that has always been inspirational to me is years ago, we were at a conference, me and our executive pastor at the time, in Jacksonville, Florida. And we were flying home. And this is back in the day. I haven't even heard about this anymore. But we used to fly standby a lot. In other words, you'd show up at the airport, and if they didn't fill up the plane, you could get a seat and go wherever you needed to go. So we wanted to leave early. It was Valentine's Day. I had to get home and see my sweetie pie. So we go to the airport, and we're waiting to get on the plane, standby. So that means if there's a seat, we can get on. Well, I get there, and I see Dr. Adrian Rogers, who's a very famous pastor. He pastored about an hour and a half up the road from where the church was that we started. His church was bigger than the city I lived in. I mean, they had softball fields. They had senior adult housing. Their auditorium seated 6,500 people. Beautiful, beautiful facility. His name was Dr. Adrian Rogers, and his church was Bellevue Baptist Church. And so he was flying standby as well. And so I thought, oh my goodness, he's flying standby. I'm flying standby. This must be a God thing. In other words, I'm going to get to sit next to Dr. Adrian Rogers while we fly from Jacksonville, Florida to Memphis, Tennessee. He's going to tell me how to be an incredible pastor. He's going to tell me how to be an amazing father and husband. And I also thought, you know what? God must have big plans for me if he's going to allow me to sit next to this amazing leader for 2 hours on this airplane. And so I looked at our executive pastor and I said, you know what? Dr. Rogers is flying standby. I'm flying standby. God's going to work this out. And so he's a pretty tall dude. So he gets on the plane, he sits down, and I get my ticket. And I, getting on the plane, and you know how it is, you get on the plane, and I'm looking at my ticket, and I'm looking where Dr. Rogers is sitting, and I'm looking at my ticket, and I'm looking where Dr. Rogers is sitting. And then I'm looking at my ticket, I'm looking right off to my right where Dr. Rogers is sitting, and realize that my ticket and where he's sitting are not the same place. Not only did I not sit next to Dr. Rogers, I sat on the very last seat on the plane. Middle seat next to the bathrooms. It's the one seat nobody wants to sit in. And I'm mad. And you know who I'm mad at? I'm mad at God and the idiot that's in my seat next to Dr. Rogers. And so I'm sitting there in the middle of the seat, and I'm like, God, this is not fair. And, I'm just whining. I'm the victim, the opposite of Jimmy V, as we heard a few moments ago. Right? I'm the victim. And you know how God works in my life and in your life as well, whether you know it or not, is he nudges your heart a little bit. It's kind of like, hey, you were just at that conference, and it was all about sharing your faith. Maybe you ought to do that. There are people on both sides of you. Why don't you just share your faith? I don't want to. I'm mad. I'm mad because I'm supposed to be sitting next to Dr. Adrian Rogers, God. He's supposed to be talking to me about how to be a great leader and a great pastor. But God, he just keeps nudging your heart, tapping you on the shoulder. So eventually, I'm like, God, they're not even looking, right? And so what I decided I was going to do is, since I was in the middle seat and we're just jammed in there, because I'm a pretty big guy. I'm like 6'4", 250 pounds, And so I decided I'm just going to kind of raise my foot, just kind of kick, you might say. And whichever one looks up, I'm going to tell about Jesus. And so I raised my foot real hard, and the woman to my right looked up, and I'm like, oh, did I kick you? and I just began to talk to her. She began to share her story, and I began to share mine, my life as a pastor and what God was doing in my life. And it was really an incredible opportunity. And I would love, right, the preacher story would be, in case you don't know a preacher story would be, as the plane was landing, she knelt down and asked Jesus into her heart, and her life was forever changed. Amen. Praise the Lord. Glory. Hallelujah. That's not what happened. And that's not why I remember the story. I really don't know what happened in her life. I pray that I made a difference and an impact. But here's what did happen. As we were walking off that plane, And, I'm wondering, did it make a difference? I'm frustrated still a little bit that I didn't get to sit next to Dr. Rogers. And then it's like kind of God nudged my heart. It's kind of like His Spirit spoke to me. It's kind of like God was saying, I could have chose Dr. Adrian Rogers to have told that woman about me. Because see, he was fine, stand by, and I was fine, stand by. God could have just as easily put him in that seat as He put me in that seat. But here's what came to my heart. But He didn't. God chose me. Of all the people on that plane, including Dr. Adrian Rogers, who could have sat next to that woman and told the story of Jesus, He chose me. And the reason that's such a powerful story for me is because that is true for you as well. You didn't fall out of a tree and you didn't wash up on the shore somewhere. God chose you. And He chose you to do something of significance. And the challenge is to go do it. That's exactly what Jimmy V challenged us to do. He was specific. And when I tell that story in a teaching, I'll always be specific. Go do this, right? Go make a difference. And this is how you can make that difference. But the reason I've told that story, one of the things as a communicator, you don't want to become where people know what you're going to say before you say it. And that's one story that I've told often, and the reason I have is because it always moves me. Because I can always remember walking off that plane. And I can remember that sense. Because in that moment, I was feeling devalued. I wasn't important enough to sit next to Dr. Rogers. When I went up and introduced myself, he wasn't the warmest person in the world to me in that moment. His church is bigger than my city. There were lots of reasons for me to feel sorry for myself. But it's in that moment that God chose to remind me that I have value, right? And so because it speaks to my heart, then I have an ability to communicate it in such a way that hopefully is inspiring to others. And you have a story as well. And I just want to encourage you to take the time to think about what those stories are, to write them down. Don't use somebody else's story. Don't manipulate people. Don't tell a sad story in order to get people to do something. If you're going to tell a sad story because it's sad to you and it moved you to a certain action and you want them to follow it. Don't manipulate. Inspire, challenge, motivate, impassion, right? But don't manipulate. Because that's when, as communicators, and the more effective you are as a communicator, the greater temptation you have to use emotion to manipulate. When you listen to Jimmy V, he's got cancer, and he's not going to live very long. But I don't feel manipulated. I don't feel like he used his cancer to get me to give money. I feel like he leveraged what was going on in his life and has inspired him to challenge me and inspire me to do something. And what better thing to do than to help him do what he feels called to do, right? So there's a big difference. He could do that in such a way where I leave saying he's using the tragedy to manipulate me. We all have felt that way. That doesn't move me to action. And because he really wants change, he doesn't manipulate, he inspires. And I encourage you to do the very same thing. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode. We're learning how to communicate and communicate effectively. I want to invite you, if you haven't already, be sure and subscribe. You can also go to potentialchurch.tv or troygramling.com and get more information about Potential Church and all the ways in which you and I could actually communicate and do life together. We'll continue on next week. Hey, why don't you invite somebody? We all need to become more effective at communicating. God bless, and we'll see you next time on the Troy Gramling Podcast.